Erika Giusta. The title is Decolonizing the Maltese Built Heritage. Erika is an architect and writer, director of innovation at Malta-based architecture firm AP Valletta. She read for MSc in architecture for sustainability and Politecnico di Turin, Italy. Holds a postgraduate master in media and communication. Business School, Milan, Italy. In 2015, she joined AP Valletta, where she currently leads a portfolio of projects, including research and development. Erika contributes to the regularly to several local and international publications, and recently co-authored the paper for Este Angelo is not a billboard for the Routledge Sustainable Heritage Handbook. Please.
Hello. Thank you for the introduction and thanks for coming. I will speak about another aspect of material culture and in a very different context, not so far away from here, and actually, after all, not so different. So I will take you through the development of a specific area of Malta, the Grand Harbour, as a case study of built heritage, which is currently in need of what we call a decolonized perspective, and I'll also try to define what a decolonized perspective is. The starting point for me was a statement, a strong statement made by the Ghanaian British curator of the latest Architecture Biennale on Venice, in which culture was defined as the sum of stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. And Leslie Loco, the curator, said that these stories have always been said, have always been recounted by this dominant voice. And here I quote, the dominant voice has historically been a singular, exclusive voice, whose reach and power ignores huge swathes of humanity, financially, creatively, conceptually, as though we have been listening and speaking in one tongue only. So this story of architecture in this specific case is to be considered incomplete. And this is also a very important point, I believe, in terms of terminology. It's incomplete, it's not wrong, but incomplete. And countries like Malta that have experienced colonization obviously have been affected by the dominance of this predominant voice more than others. So this is the perspective that I tried to adopt as in developing this research and in looking at the Grand Harbour of Valletta. Valletta is the capital city of the Maltese archipelago. And the choice of the Grand Harbour is related to the fact that the Grand Harbour is really the reason, the main driver behind a number of political and economic decisions that have been taken in relation to the development of the island. The Grand Harbour, in fact, is really what attracted a number of conquerors throughout the centuries. And as this Maltese economist recently said, with a less central position in the Mediterranean or without a natural harbour, meaning the Grand Harbour, Malta's history would have been completely different. It would have been really uneventful, probably. Like other islands in the area which didn't have a natural harbour or just didn't have such a central location. So really, it is about the land. It's about, in this case, literally the geographic, the geological and geographical aspects of the land. But yeah, I will try to also define what decolonized means in this context, because it's a very perhaps even abused word lately, and there are very different opinions as to what decolonizing means. In this case, it's very much related to the Maltese context, so decolonizing really is about emancipating the perspective from the presentist perspective that tends to privilege certain aspects of history in order to suit the needs of the dominant voice again. And obviously to do so in a critical manner, in this case by reassessing the monumental values of built heritage. In this research that I developed with a number of colleagues actually, thanks to a number of conversations with colleagues at the office at AP, we tried to combine both textual references and material culture evidences, meaning the buildings, the actual fabric of the city, as the main references for the study. I will give a very briefly historical overview because I am aware that Malta perhaps is not that familiar to many people here. Malta's history is very layered, very rich. Has a strong connection with Palestine in terms of exchanges, in terms of key historical events. So from definition rule all the way through Roman invasion, Byzantine rule. It was under the Arab rule for centuries. That Arab rule was followed by a Norman invasion. The Normans came from Sicily. After having conquered Sicily, they took Malta. They Christianized Malta, and in 1530, Malta was literally given to the Knights of the Hospitalier Order of Jerusalem, of St. John's, as a sort of gift to the order in order to support them in their mission to defend Christianity. 1565 is a key historical event, a turning point in Maltese history, because that is what is referred to as the Great Siege of Malta, in which the Knights defeated the Ottoman fleet that was attacking the city, and till this day is sort of taken as the symbolic representation of the importance of the country in defending Christianity and Europe as a, let's say, result. The Order of the Knights eventually ended with the Napoleonic occupation in 1798, which was followed by the British occupation, and eventually Malta became a British colony until 1964, in the year in which Malta gained independence. The truth is that it took a little longer to actually reach a sort of fully fledged independence as a government. So we actually take 1974 as the year in which Malta truly sort of freed herself of the British troops and the British army. This is Fort Sant'Angelo. I'm realizing now that I should have put more photos of what this built heritage, this brown harbor actually looks like. But this is a key element in the development of the area and of the entire region. Fort Sant'Angelo was a crucial element of Maltese built heritage, both for political and historical reasons, but also because it's one of the few buildings that actually survived throughout the centuries and presents a number of different layers of manipulation that represents almost all the different stages of Maltese development, except the Arab period, which was intentionally removed and demolished whenever possible, obviously to fit the purpose of the Knights of Malta and to fit the narrative of Malta as the bulwark of Christianity. So when the Knights arrived, the first thing that they did really was to build fortifications. Unfortunately, there is a lack of material evidence of the Arab rule, of the Arab time, and this is what we consider the first map of Malta. by Bartolomeo Genga. And as you can see, really what is represented there is a small urban settlement which was pre-existing, so this is what the knights found really, and the fortifications of the city of Valletta on that peninsula that you see there. So really this says a lot about the character of the city. Valletta was built as a fortress, as a military infrastructure settlement by the knights in relation to their own mission as this new political power that was trying to assert its importance in the Mediterranean as the ultimate bulwark of Christianity, but also somehow trying to assert their importance in a position which was, at the time, very controversial because, again, here we should actually delve deeper into the history of the Knights of Malta, but at that point in time, they were questioned by the Vatican, by the Pope, in terms of their relevance and their importance. So for them to actually have the opportunity to showcase their military power and their importance was of essential importance in order to survive and to keep developing. They only started to inhabit the land after the Battle of Lepanto, so this is the late 16th century. And as you can see here, this is really the first map which shows an actual urban environment, an actual city where people could live. Because until then, most of the knights and their large entourages were actually staying on the other side of the harbor, in what is today called Birgo. Valletta was in itself an interesting experiment, not only from a historical and political perspective, but also because the architect who designed it was an Italian architect sent by the Pope. And what he did was really to try and embody the ideal Renaissance city, to imagine what the perfect representation of European ideas, especially in terms of architecture and urban design, would look like, would feel like. So what they did was to build this extremely rigorous grid built with local stone that was actually quarried on site, because this peninsula used to be a sort of big hill. It used to be called Mount Cheverus, in fact. And Valletta therefore became the place where every knight would find their own auberge, meaning their conventual homes, and every conventual home would represent the country in Europe where they would come from. So the city became a sort of European settlement, and European in nature, meaning that it had to represent different European countries. It's almost like an experiment ante litteram of what a European city should look like and be like. The development of Valletta and of the infrastructure of the knights in the 16th century happened extremely quickly. So after the Great Siege in 1564, all the building activities, all the fortifications building, etc., happened extremely quickly. So you have to imagine the city as also this gigantic construction site in which in less than 2 decades, what used to be a rural society, a rural setting, had been completely transformed. And I chose here a photo which is historically incorrect because it's of a street in Gozo, which is the sister island of Malta, in the actual 20th century. But it's just to give you an idea of how there was this duality of the character of the island and its built fabric between what is the vernacular, meaning the rural, that had been drastically transformed in order to accommodate the needs of the knights, to showcase their military strength, their prestige, to assert themselves on the international scene. And this is a depiction of the main elevation of the St. John's Cathedral, which is where Caravaggio later would paint the famous beheading of St. John's, and which is probably the most symbolic monument representing the importance and also the traces, the that the Knights left in the region. When the Knights arrived, they also sort of were very smart in trying to adapt and exploit local material culture and local traditions in order to accommodate their own needs. This I thought was interesting because, as just as an example of traditional Maltese systems, architectural systems, and how they were manipulated and how they evolved throughout the centuries, this Maltese roofing system with kileb and shorrock in stone, in local limestone, I was told that is also found very similar in this region, and I'm sure that there could be a number of others parallelisms in this sense. But as you can see, what the Knights did really was to exploit the skills of the local masons and employ them in the construction of, for example, the diaphragm arch that is found to be found in St. John's. So what you see in that picture is an interior of the St. John's Cathedral. So to be able to give shape and accommodate the elements of the Baroque tradition that were more suitable to the representation of their own power and of their political ambition. Throughout the centuries, under the rule of the Knights, the only element that was actually working as almost counter settlers and counter their own vision of Malta just as a war machine was the trade, the presence of a lot of merchants that would use Malta as the ideal point in between the East and the West, and that would actually encourage a number of exchanges, not only of economic nature, but also of cultural nature. So the evolution of the Grand Harbour could be really defined, summarized with this simple, very, very simple statement. So from the origins of Malta, of the Grand Harbour and of Valletta as war machine, to suddenly a mercantile city that was thriving and that therefore was in need of, once again, adapting its own built heritage. Most of the fortifications in the harbour were therefore either punctured through or heavily modified with new infrastructural network that would actually allow the mercantile port activities and that would therefore encourage a new phase of development, not only of Maltese economy, but also of Maltese culture. So Malta suddenly became, thanks also to quite a long period of peace in the Mediterranean, excluding a couple of moments of crisis, Malta suddenly became a very thriving and multicultural, international mercantile city. This obviously was very much represented at that point in time by the Baroque taste of the Knights, by the Baroque style of the Knights, that they very much used in the construction of their main buildings as the homogenizing elements, as the representative, very representative of the cultural identity, the European cultural identity. So really this phase, which is what today still informs the cultural identity of Malta as the most relevant phase of development, could be considered almost as I said earlier, as a European settlement experiment ante litteram. The big difference here, and the reason why it was then so assimilated by the indigenous people, by the local people, is that the Knights never or very rarely and mildly entered into conflict with the local population. So they actually were very aware of the importance of assimilating also local material culture and make an effort in that respect to create a more compact society. After the Napoleonic invasion, though, for a number of very complex historical and political events, Malta ended up under the rule of the British government as a crown colony. And the British troops really, as you can see depicted in this painting by Carmichael from 1854, really decided to stay in Malta for military purposes mainly. So there are a number of there are a number of records of even discussions in Parliament at the House of Commons in London where Malta was referred to as a fortress colony. So their main interest was, again, for the strategic purpose, for the configuration of the land that would allow them to very easily make use of the existing facilities, but also of the natural harbor present there in the area as a perfect military station in the middle of the Mediterranean. And therefore, in this research, really what we argue is also that the built heritage that they contributed to was mainly of military nature, and they almost regressed, they almost forced Malta back to its original role as war machine rather than thriving an international and multicultural mercantile city. Once again, though, thanks to, after the Crimean War, thanks to a number of years of peace, relatively calm, trade became the sort of main counter-colonizer, and the infrastructure, the military infrastructure was once again modified in order to accommodate trade and mercantile exchanges and port activities. So this is just one example of how the fortifications were modified and perforated. So for example, this is a Baraka lift. It's a lift that takes people all the way from the Grand Harbour to straight into the center of Valletta. You can see the original lift built by the British on one side, and the new lift that the office where I work designs. And I won't go too deep into this, but it's also interesting because that new lift is the result of the reimagination of these war machines that they were probably using to climb those fortifications. And so it's also an effort in trying to make use of different elements of that material culture, of that political history, in order to create something which is contemporary and at the same time truly Maltese. Fast forward to the post-independence, so again, a series of political events in the aftermath of Second World War granted the independence to Malta, but the years after the independence really are marked by a struggle for self-determination. A self-determination that lived its most, let's say, fruitful period between the 60s and the 70s. In the aftermath of the independence, obviously there was great excitement for finding a new language which would be truly Maltese, and that coincided with the development of postmodern and contemporary.
3 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
That coincided with the development of postmodern theories, and forgive me if I use a lot of architectural references for which I know we should have more time. But so a lot of Maltese architects started to try and develop their own language and to act on Maltese landscape and Maltese built heritage in a way that would reflect the characteristics of Maltese culture, but at the same time be somehow very international and connected to the rest of the world. So really, postmodern and contemporary regionalism adopted the vernacular as their main language to develop their own identity in these lively, very lively and alive years of post-independence. Most of these projects during this period, so between the 60s and the early 80s, actually didn't happen in the Grand Harbour. So one might argue that then the Grand Harbour lost its relevance in terms of how representative it was of the status of the islands. Let's say in the years in the late 90s that were marked by then the debate whether to join the European Union or not, the Grand Harbour found, again, relevance in the national discourse because it was presenting those elements of Baroque architecture that, in order to be able to be recognized as Europeans, the Maltese people really wanted to stress and to emphasize. So this is just an image of the stores built by the Knights on the Grand Harbour, the Valletta waterfront that were restored with European money, again, in order to emphasize those elements that are proof of Maltese people being European Christians rather than any other potential definition that one could discuss. So really, I would just like to conclude by saying that this rich layering of cultural, economic development of Malta, which has been it's been a series of colonization, and has been a series of also different commodification, really, of built heritage of the harbour, led to a current situation in which certain elements of the discourse took over at the expense of a genuinely critical dialogical understanding of the monumental values of that built heritage, meaning we now look at this area and at the built heritage, the monuments of that area, as commodities in order to serve the economic development or a main narrative of the country, which sort of supports the main narrative of Malta as the city of the knights, the island of this legendary Christian order defending Europe. But really, there is no awareness nor understanding of other layers which are equally important and are equally crucial in the real determination of what a Maltese identity really is, irrespectively of its British colonial past. I hope this was, so yeah, really, it's about, this is exactly what I just said, in the sense like to reclaim, on one hand, the polarization of the discourse. So when we say Malta also has a lot of Semitic influences, I mean, the Maltese language is a Semitic language. It doesn't mean that we reject the European aspect of Maltese culture, but at this point in time, the discourse in Malta is very much polarized in this manner. So when stating one, the other one is almost like sort of taken for granted that is rejected. And this obviously creates a lot of cultural fragmentation and what is defined as social amnesia, which I know it's another term that would require a whole session just in terms of, okay, how to define it. But anyway, and to therefore reclaim the agency of the collective. I know this was probably a bit rushed through, especially for someone who's not familiar with Malta, and I hope it was at least a good introduction to the built heritage of a country which is very rarely looked at because of its peripheral position, its small scale, but I believe really presents a number of interesting elements, especially in relation to what we've been discussing here at the conference. So, thank you.